All right. Hello and welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. My name is Brett Pontecorvo. You might know me from Live Keyboardist, or perhaps you know me from Backstage with Gig Performer because we've been rolling on this for a while now. I'm so happy to be here. And we are in the middle of our genres series. One of the things that's so special about Gig Performer, it is an open template. So no matter what style of music you're playing, you're able to create something that really works well for you. And so as we've been exploring the genres, we've been seeing, we had our special guest, Robert Martin with us, who had a really simple layout and it worked really well for what he did. We had special guest Bruce Moore, who didn't have a simple Gig Performer layout. There was scripting, there was MIDI guitar, there was all sorts of really cool and interesting stuff happening in his setup. And you know what? Both of those things are a totally appropriate and awesome way to use Gig Performer. And it's one of the things that makes it special and unique. We also had Igor Paspalj join us, who gave kind of a really interesting presentation again. Like, Igor, amazing player, really nice guy, and he's using Gig Performer in a simple way. But what is special about Gig Performer is it gets you to making the music quickly. And that is really what it's all about. Like, we are musicians, we're making music. How do we get to making the music quickly? And then how do we feel like we really have control over what we're doing when we're performing live? Now, I'm really excited because we have a special guest on with us today, Joel. And he is a touring musician, or he was a touring musician. He'll tell us more about what he does, but he's playing 5 nights a week using Gig Performer. So it gets a lot of work out. He's doing some programming. Now, programming, of course, is not mandatory, but I think it's interesting to see what's possible when we do it. And he's got a hardware setup he's going to show us. He's got a software setup he's going to show us. And when I asked him how he wanted to be introduced, he told me to let everybody know he is wearing pants. So if he has to let his dogs in during the meeting, we'll all be able to verify that. But I want to bring Joel on so he can share with us what he's doing and tell us a little bit more about that. So Joel, welcome to Backstage.
Hey, thanks. Actually, the dog is in. She's right here.
I love it.
Oops, there she is. She wants nothing to do with this.
I saw them pop in the background. I was like, the dogs have arrived early.
Yeah.
So it's so good.
Ice cream to keep her busy.
Beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
My background, I was a touring sideman for most of the 80s, the latter part of the 70s and the beginning of the 90s with major artists like Kenny G and Guns N' Roses and Metallica and Beach Boys and all these different bands. And I was their hired touring keyboard player. And I used to go with 10 keyboards. I had a 1959 Hammond B3, a Yamaha C6 Grand. At one point, I had 4 sequential circuits keyboards because I was an endorsee of theirs. And as well as a Mini Moog and God knows what else. All kinds of custom stuff. 2 40 space racks, 2 Leslies, 1,000 watts of JBL monitoring, and I was deaf most of the time, and you know, my hair was down to about here, and it was bright red, and so you know, and that's what I did for a living, and I played about 320 nights a year, and then quit to go back to school and get a jazz theory degree. Moved out to the East Coast and went to work for Ensoniq, heading up their sound development group, and worked for them for several years. Then went to work for Sonic Foundry, and then moved here to Austin a few years ago to start playing again full time. And now I work for a tech company, actually video conferencing. But every night I'm either rehearsing, playing, or writing. Every night of the week.
It's been quite a journey.
And I survived so far, except for my allergies, which are really kicking me today.
Wow, that's insane. So when you were touring, like back in the 80s, like how are you moving all your stuff? Were there people moving it for you? Like that's a lot of gear. There are people moving it for you.
Everything was cased up. I showed up for sound check, and the unions put it up, and they took it down, and I had an 8x8 stage that went with it, and went in the trucks, and then I went back to the bus and became unconscious at several degrees and started the same thing the next day.
Yeah, yeah.
And
When we were emailing back and forth, something you mentioned that like really kind of stuck out to me was I'm going to paraphrase your wording, but you were like, there's a lot to be said about like what you personally bring to the table in terms of reliability in performance, which I guess I roughly translated as you have to be ready to play in order for any of your keyboards or software or whatever to be helpful to you. Um,
right.
yeah, which I think it's important to like mention that. So you're playing at this point in your career 320 nights a year. Like, what are you doing to make sure that you're staying sharp other than just the like sheer repetition? Like, were there things that you were doing to make that possible? What was your process for like being prepared for those gigs? Like, how did that all go?
For me, it was at one point I was practicing 6 hours a day.
Right,
And
right.
just and working to make sure my dexterity was right and that and I would chart stuff out constantly. And
Mm-hmm.
now I do the same kind of exercise with less practice, about an hour or two or three, on average. But I do everything on an iPad. And
Right.
so everything is all my notes are all on my iPad. So
Wow. See if I can
and
make you bigger. Let me
it
see.
makes it here we go.
There we go.
It
Nice.
makes it
Okay.
super easy for me to have my notes there. But the other thing that it took me a little bit to figure out is how to hit one button and make everything programmed.
Yeah.
And so before Gig Performer, I was running multiple synths, and I was hitting a button in a program called Band Helper, and it would program everything. Because, like all of us, I mean, I now wear glasses,
Yeah.
and I don't have the time to go to my Nord and look in their little display, put my glasses on, scroll around to find things. And the song's already started, by the way, because the rest of the band's not waiting. And
Right.
so I need to go from one song to the next song to the next song. So I built a rack and a MIDI patch bay, which is actually still here, not connected anymore.
Nice. Yep.
But and it was all in a rat's nest of MIDI cables to connect everything up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really excited, and I was looking for a way to migrate to software. And in the past, up until a couple of years ago, it really wasn't viable to bring it live,
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't reliable enough. The computers weren't fast enough, or you had to carry around multiple computers and that kind of thing. So it wasn't really viable. But I've been looking and following it and looking at ways to do it. And then Gig Performer comes along, and I meet this guy, David Jameson, about a year ago.
Yep.
And we spent a Saturday morning on a Zoom call, and he just went deep dive. And I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And it came about because I had bought it the day before from Sweetwater,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gig Performer. And it was like, what did I buy? And I think I know what I bought. And it said 1%, extremely low CPU usage as a shell program. And I went, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's super stable. I mean, I have it right now running on two different computers and two different operating systems on two different silicon. One's the Apple Silicon and one's Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's running equally well on both, with zero problems. The only problems I've had have been user problems.
Right. Right. Which we all have them, right? From time to time.
Yes, except David.
David's backstage, for those of you who can't see, rolling his eyes and laughing. It's
but it comes down to getting the discipline of what you need to do to prepare more than anything else.
Yeah.
And testing it, and you need to be reliable as a member of a band. The same thing as the guitar player has to make sure their strings are on, they're tuned, they're fresh, so that they don't break and the drumsticks aren't going to shatter. You have to make sure that when you press a key on a keyboard that it's going to make sound, or it's sounding like this, which there's nothing coming out, which means there's a big problem. And I had one night actually with Gig Performer that all of a sudden I hit one of the songs, and 3/4 of the sounds didn't load.
Wow.
And I was like, what's going on? I hit another song and none of the sounds loaded. But Gig Performer was just sitting there idling and working just fine, but nothing was coming out of it in my keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
And
What ended up happening?
Pardon?
What ended up happening? What caused it?
It was a cheap USB cable.
Yeah, there you go.
It was a cheap USB-C cable that I got off of Amazon that was not rated fast enough to handle the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so while Gig Performer was working just fine, it wasn't able to interface with my keyboards or my IO device,
Mm-hmm.
which at
Mm-hmm.
that time was Focusrite. And they weren't I just couldn't get them to work together. So that night was a real problem.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I'm still using I still have a Nord, which is going to be replaced with a controller.
Mm-hmm.
But I had it that night, so I was basically playing piano and organ sounds for the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, which if that's never happened to you before, like if you're watching and you're like, "Oh, it was a problem solved," like that's. I mean, I guess you can speak for yourself, Joel, but a couple times where I've had to do that, it doesn't feel great.
No, and no, and to that end, this was the cable causing the problem. These were the two cables causing the problem that are now sitting here, and here was the third one.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're now sitting in a bucket that I just use as emergency spares, but probably just going to throw them in the trash because it's just not a good idea.
Yeah.
You're running a lot of data and it's live streaming. And so you need to consider what it takes to make live streaming work and be reliable. Because Gig Performer is like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. But if you get into your computer or out of your computer correctly, it doesn't matter what Gig Performer does and all the work that you put into it. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it comes back to the same thing that we learned decades ago. A bad audio cable makes you sound bad. A bad MIDI cable makes you not work. A bad USB cable stops it completely.
Mm-hmm.
And learned that lesson for the third time now in my life, that bad digital cables that are not rated can't handle the kind of throughput that you need to put in.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big thing. So that was a great thing to learn. And then getting an interface that's fast enough. Using a cheap interface, it's not going to be able to produce. You're going to get clicking. You're going to get problem with the attacks on notes, especially things like organs, pianos, and horns that have heavy attacks. Those transients are going to be lost. So, getting good cabling is as important as having a fast computer with a lot of memory, and it's all part of the same equation. You've got to cable. It seems ridiculous, but bad cables will kill all that technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were mentioning like, yeah, one of the things you said you wanted to talk about was hardware. So, like, if somebody's watching right now and they're like, "Oh, I never thought about USB cables before," or USB MIDI. Right, exactly. So what would you say? Like, how can we just make sure that we're buying quality cables? Where do we look to get those? What are we looking for when we're trying to find that?
So I did a little bit of research, and if you're running a Mac, which I'm running a couple of them, and and they're USB-C, I basically said, okay, what's the highest rated cable and what's the other ones?
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for throughput, and I came across that 40 gig per second is a good benchmark. Anything above that is even better. 40 gig per second is a good benchmark to make sure that you have enough throughput to make a Mac M1 laptop work with very complex Gig Performer stuff with 20 synths, which I'll show you guys in a bit. 20 synth modules running simultaneously and have the throughput to get all the attacks right, to make everything work and be able to switch from song to song to song without having any glitches. So that 40 gig per second mark seems to be a good benchmark.
Gotcha. And Glenn actually just wrote in, any concerns about USB 2 versus USB 3?
Most of the controllers are running USB 2.
Right.
The computers are running USB 3 or USB-C, but most of the controllers, like my Arturia controller, my native instruments, my Nord, Roland, they're all running USB 2.
Right. So it's that 40
so-
gig per second marker. That's the number we're looking for.
Right. Now, USB 2 cables, you won't get that kind of cable. It doesn't exist.
Gotcha.
But USB 3 cables and USB-C cables will be there, and that's going to be that's going to be the most important cable, because that's the I/O between your computer and your interface. The most important connection. The interface coming from your controller is not handling any audio.
Right.
So it's just handling instruction sets. Those are really low. You're probably looking at 128K running while you're doing a run on a keyboard. It's probably 128K. I mean, the audio on this call, and sorry, I work in tech, so doing video conferencing. So the audio on this call is 128K on a standard video call. It's compressed, but that is the benchmark for doing video conferencing. It maxes out at 128K. Video maxes out at 10 megs per second. But the audio standard for SIP is at 128K. So the instruction set coming from here is far less than that.
Right.
So I've had, from the USB 2 side, I put junk cables on and they work. I don't use them anymore because I learned my lesson.
Right.
But I use better grade USB 2 cables. But USB 2, there's a lot more latitude than there is on USB 3, and the live streaming of audio and multi-channel live streaming of audio that you're trying to get to that interface, which also is sucking up a lot of juice, because you're also powering it at the same time. If you're like me, I'm also powering it. So my USB hub is a really important component, because I have 4 devices hooked up to my USB hub. I have my iPad, my Mac. I have actually 5 devices. I have 2 keyboards and a drum pad that the drummer is using as well to do percussion.
So if people are listening and you're like rattling off some of this gear, right? Like, not everybody probably needs a USB hub, right? Like, at what point, first of all, can you just maybe explain what it is and what you're doing with it, and why it actually is necessary for what you're doing specifically?
Right. So my MacBook Pro, my M1 Pro here, this guy that I picked up right after I got Gig Performer, to run it, specifically to run Gig Performer. And it doesn't have connections to the internet or anything else.
Okay.
It's strictly a music device. It'd be the same as one of my synths. So that has 2 USB-C inputs. That's it. So I don't have enough physical inputs to hook more than 2 things up. My interface takes 1. That leaves me with 1. So I can hook up 1 keyboard, but I run 2 synths live. I have the drum controller as well, which is I forgot the name of it. Keith McMillan drum pad.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then I have a breath controller for doing when I do sax leads, and I use the SWAM modeling best sax I've ever heard on a synth plugin. And so I use that for expression as well, to get something that sounds more realistic. And so that leaves me with 5 inputs total. So I need something that's doing that aggregation and connection, and that's the USB hub.
And how do you pick a good one?
So I went and did some research again, and I ended up with a $350 hub from Belkin that has the throughput. Again, you're looking for throughput, and it needs to be powered. So I've had the problem where during a gig, you're trying just to use all these devices and not power them. And eventually the iPad and the computer run out of power during a gig, which is awful.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't want to have multiple power supplies. So everything that I have is USB powered. So I need power somewhere. So the Belkin hub has Thunderbolt. It has USB 3 and USB 2 connections, as well as HDMI, which I don't care about. and it has a giant brick power supply. And so that keeps everything very simple here. And I can actually, so this is the new rack that has that USB hub in it.
Nice.
And that is the power supply, that giant brick next to it.
Wow. Okay.
And then it's just power conditioning, and the power for the hub, and that's it. So the rest of this power supply is empty.
Yep. So that's what you take with you. That whole box there is
it is. That's
what comes.
And the front side of it, here's the front side. So the front side has my headphone amp, so I can monitor, and here I have in-ear monitors. My I/O interface that gives me my volume control, and then my XLRs out to the house. And the other feed is my in-ear monitor coming back from the band, which goes directly into my little headphone amp. And it's real clean. It's only, I went from 40 space racks down to 2. I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, it sounds like a celebration to me. So when you show up to the gig, you've got 2 racks and 1 keyboard, 2 keyboards. It depends on the gig.
I always have 2 keyboards. Sometimes I have 3.
Gotcha. And before we look at Gig Performer, you were also mentioning audio cables, right? What's your standard? What do you buy for audio cables, and why do you buy them?
I have been since the 80s.
Say that again.
Whirlwind.
Great.
It just always works. It's one of those things. Okay, so you can buy, whatever cables, and most of them will work. But I just had great luck using it since the early 80s or late 70s. And it's just something that my sound techs were like, this is all you get. And I went, okay, fine, I'll just use them.
Yep.
And I'm just stuck with Whirlwind. The stuff never fails for me. But everybody's free to, audio cables you can do a lot of abuse with, and you can get away with a lot of stuff. But again, an audio cable goes bad, you get a cheap audio cable that's molded ends, and chances are, somewhere or another, somebody's going to step on it, and it's going to break that little jacket, and those little 24 gauge connectors or wires are going to get shredded. So.
Yep. Absolutely. So quality of gear, right? And especially, I think this is important to point out, right? Like, Joel, you're playing a lot, right? So if somebody is saying hey, I'm gigging once a week, there's going to just be a different quality requirement, just in terms of how much beating can this take? You're going to go through something way faster. It's like how much mileage you're putting on a car, right? So if you're watching and you're going, man, I need all of this stuff, probably, you have to look at through the lens of, well, how much mileage am I going to be putting on this gear, and kind of go from there. But Joel, I would love for you to kind of walk us through some of your Gig Performer setup. Are you ready to do some of that?
Sure.
Cool.
So one of the things before we get to the shared screen, I'm actually going to show you something that it took me a while to figure out. And again, one of the things that I set up, that was important, was the ability for me to hit a song here, and it programs everything. And that's the way my synths were set up. So I can just hit any one of these. I have to get mirrored here. So
there you go.
I can hit any one of these, and it's going to program all my keyboards. So in addition to that, Gig Performer is now one of my keyboards. Basically, for all intents and purposes, it's a software part of the keyboard. So it's the synth engine without the keys. And so I basically need to have it change as quickly. And so what I learned, Band Helper isn't really set up or understanding how Gig Performer works. It understands how keyboards work and MIDI messages, which is basically a bank in a program. And MIDI controllers, and it's real, it's real straight. It's 1-to-1. But with Gig Performer now, you go into, it's not necessarily 1-to-1, because there are other ways to change programs in Gig Performer, and Band Helper doesn't really know what to do with that. So it took me a while to figure it out, but now it's at the point, and I'm going to do a thing. I talked with David about this. I'm going to do a thing, a little blog on how to set this up correctly. But now when I hit a program, it automatically changes. Sorry, and it's going to be a little off center here, but it automatically changes all of my songs are in, and it doesn't matter what order they are in the set list. And my whatever band can change sets whenever, and this will change automatically, and it changes that quick, and it's ready to go. So it makes it's super useful that way, because now I have this acting the same as any one of my keyboards, and it doesn't matter what order I arrange things within Gig Performer or within Band Helper. The programs are set up so that I can just quickly go from one to the other, regardless of what order the singer wants to put them in or the guitar player wants to put them in. I don't care.
Are you running, what program are you running? Is that hooked up with OSC, or how are you controlling Gig Performer?
So I'm controlling it directly from my iPad using Band Helper.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and it's simple and it works.
Yeah,
and
well, that's paramount, right?
Those are the two requirements. Getting it to work that way was not quite so simple, because of what the two programs want to see from the other. And then added on top of it, when you plug an iPad into MacBook Pro, to get it to send out of Band Helper, you have to enable it on a, there's a menu. I wonder if I have it up in this one. No, I don't. But there's a menu actually to enable that device in audio MIDI setup on a Mac, that you have to enable it every single time. And if you don't, it's just not going to send anything. So there's a number of steps, and that's why David said you should do a blog on this. And I said, yeah, that's probably a good idea, because it's not very straightforward, and it did take a lot of trial and error to get it to where it's reliable. But now it works 100% of the time.
So you found the solution. So you were showing me, I guess, those controls, and it looks like you've got Gig Performer open right now on two machines. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so iPad is what you're using. That's like the launch pad. You're controlling where you are from the iPad. iPad's communicating with Gig Performer. Gig Performer is receiving information from your two keyboards, plus maybe the third one that you're using sometimes.
Right.
Awesome.
And then it's sending out to my audio interface and out to the house.
Beautiful.
And then also to my in-ears.
Beautiful. So you're using Gig Performer for your audio mix as well.
Yeah, so I have an unusual mix because I'm using a smaller interface. A lot of the smaller interfaces, basically on space and really what I need, because I used to use, like everybody, use large mixers and everything else. My audio interface is now my mixer. So I also have a digital Hammond, which is just used for Hammond sounds, for the Hammond organ. And so that runs analog into my audio interface. And I set it up so that, and I can show it. Let me see. Let's do it here. So I set up my audio interface as a straight pass-through mixer. So I have my audio interface is coming into my Gig Performer mixer, and then I'm going straight out here. But what you'll notice is here I have two gain and balance controls, so that I have analog control over my mixes live. So I can change my analog controls my straight pass through here, and my digital control is controlling it here. I have left and right, but what I had to do, because these small interfaces don't allow you to make dual mono, I had to create dual mono. So I have my left is feeding left and right. My right is feeding left and right. And the same thing here. So that way, each one of these is getting everything from my mix, regardless of where it's coming in from. Left and right are getting fed, which means that I'm hearing things in both ears, and the same signal is going to the house. So that was a consideration I had to figure out, because it's not really straightforward, because the interface didn't support dual mono routing.
So this is like there are a million ways to think about this, but like one of the reasons cables are so profound as a live performance tool, like what's used in Gig Performer, is exactly what you're describing. The ability to easily create things that don't exist otherwise, like
Right.
dual mono, right? Like, which I guess you could do with sends and returns, but just takes way more brain power, right? Like the pro of cabling is having this flexibility.
Right. And so I looked at the output of Gig Performer like a standard mixer. Everything goes into a mixer, then it goes into a gain stage, and then it goes to an output. And that physical output is on this computer is my universal audio, but on my other one, it literally just has 2 ins and 2 outs.
Gotcha.
And they're hard pan left and hard pan right. So to get mono, you have to send signal to both. You don't get phase cancellation, which is cool. That's a really good thing. I'm not getting comb filtering or anything else, which means Gig Performer is getting the signal to my physical outputs at the same time on the same. So I'm not getting loss of frequencies or filtering because my signals are not timed correctly. So a really important thing. And trust me, if you put one of those lines and put a 2 millisecond delay on one of those lines, you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So that's a really important thing is that the information from left and right channels arrive at the analog output or at the physical interface at exactly the same time, so that you're getting a sum and you're not getting phase cancellation.
Yep, which nobody wants to hear. We actually have a question from Naboja, who's sitting in the room watching us as we speak. I think you mentioned this. I actually can't remember what it was either. What are you using for your sax, your wind breath controller?
I'm using the Tech one. And so there aren't many wind controllers. I can grab it real quick out of my backpack.
Yeah, go for it. And if you have any other questions, while Joel's going to grab that, definitely do put them in the comments. We'll have him answer it. Thanks for grabbing that, Joel.
Sure. So this is the breath controller. It's super small and super light. It's made in Sweden. There's a guy that makes it, and it has a USB 2 on one side, and it has this simple little bite piece that does pressure, and this is an empty tube.
Gotcha.
So it's very simple. And gosh, why can't I do reverse today? And that's it. That's the whole thing. It's really simple. And it just comes up. It has a little control panel on it that you can program it to whatever MIDI control channel or MIDI control device you want to send it to. But I have a program for expression, and then when you go into the SWAM audio modeling sax, you have all these different things. It's a brilliant plugin. And for doing sax, it just has all kinds of programmability that I've never seen on a plugin before. So you can get something that sounds realistic, that's playable, that's expressive, that actually really sounds like a saxophone. And after working with Kenny G for a year and David Sanborn, you kind of go, if it doesn't sound real, don't play it. If it sounds like it's coming out of a Roland keyboard, and not to bash Roland or anybody else, but they have a solo sax that sounds like it's coming out of a keyboard.
Yep.
And I don't want to play sax if it sounds like it's coming out of a keyboard. And I spend a lot of time learning the nuances of playing that sound like a sax player plays it and not like a keyboard player plays it.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, just in terms of like, really having the vision to go after something specific, right? I guess it starts with kind of even having that vision. So you were starting to show us here, you've got your audio coming into that audio mixer, which I'm assuming you're routing those inputs there. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. You're routing to the other outputs to 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that
correct?
Yep.
So I have my piano, and in this case, Siren that's running to outputs 1 and 2, and then 7 and 8, which is my direct pass-through input, are going to outputs 3 and 4, which have the analog gain control here, which is a separate control.
Perfect. Yep. Perfect. And so
And
do you recreate this in every patch?
every single one.
Yep.
You can pick any one of these. Oops, except they're not centered. But yeah, any one that you pick has exactly the same thing.
Gotcha.
It makes it that guarantees that I have consistency of control all the way through it. So there's something like 60 some songs on this one, but I have other bands. I make a separate gig file for each band.
Okay.
Just to make things easier on me. And then I export Rackspaces and import Rackspaces for bands that play the same song.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for those of you who are thinking that might be a lot, the other feature that Gig Performer does have is if you import a song, it will bring the Rackspaces with you. So
Right.
Joel, if you're playing in two bands and they happen to be doing the same song, you can just import a song into a gig file. Rackspaces come along with it.
Correct. So here are most of my projects up on the right-hand side right now that are separate gig files. It just makes it very easy. And then I have another folder that has this folder that has massive amounts of other gig files and different things that I'm working with or testing. And, if it's a complex song, I'll build it as its own gig file. And then I'll literally just copy and paste from that gig file into one of my big gig files. So I don't have to go through all the loading of this. I can have it here like the Thomas Dolby one, for example, which took a ton of work. And I worked on it as a song, and then I literally just grabbed everything inside there and pasted it into a new Rackspace here to keep it clean. And it's this.
Whoa.
Just this monstrous thing that has stuff programmed all over the place. A shaker on one key, the bats on another key.
Blinded me with science.
That's actually my voice, believe it or not.
I love it.
That's run through. I ran it through Alter Boy, one of the Sound Toys plugins, and then through some other plugins, and did that inside of my DAW in Cubase, got it correct, and then took it out and brought it into Native Instruments. And so it's in here. All of my samples are here.
Yes, but as a blind scientist, it was a bit surprising that the girl blinded me with science. She blinded me with science! 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 Science!
Yeah, so it's like all these one-shot samples, they're all sitting there. And then the synth, what is it? My brain isn't thinking.
No worries.
There it is. Yeah, sorry. But,
It's so good. So, okay, so you're sampling, you're pulling it into Contact. I'm looking at so many wires. Can you tell us what is happening? Like, what am I looking at here? What's going on?
Let's zoom in a little bit. So
yeah,
these are all samples.
gotcha.
So those are all the vocal samples. Then I have a string section and a brass section, and I don't think I have them up on this other keyboard. No, I don't.
Okay.
And then here is another string section and brass section for a different part of the song. These are the and so I built chords.
Gotcha.
And so all of these, they're playing the same plugin to save memory, because you see, even with all this stuff running, I've got CPU usage at 30%.
And this is the computer you're streaming from.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
So when I first built this, I had CPU usage at 85%, which wasn't working. And that was at idle. So when I would hit a note, you would just see this thing redline and it would just crap out. And I'm like, what is happening here? And then I looked up and I went, wow, my CPU usage is out of control. And so I started doing this because these take nothing. This is what takes all the memory.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is that, and not bashing Arturia because they're some of my favorite plugins, they use more CPU usage than like Cherry Audio.
Mm-hmm.
And native instruments, depending on the instrument, like the horns use more than some of the others. So you have to be careful when you're picking the plugin of which one you're actually going to go to. But I mean,
that's important. That's important because everything is using it differently. Like Gig Performer is pretty, it's not taking much from your computer, but if you load in a ton of plugins that are very power hungry to any live performance software, you start to have an issue because of what the plugin itself is doing.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the same reason, like, there's two different dial tone setups in this song. And so I set them up using chords built this way rather than having multiple plugins. And they're all going to the same monophonic plugin that's just running a single note out of here. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very simple patch that's just running kind of a phone sine wave sound. And it's just, but all the magic comes in from these, and these take nothing.
And you're using those, I'm assuming those are just MIDI in blocks with a transpose feature on it. Is that correct?
They're actually, that's all that they are.
Yep. Okay.
And they're just transposed.
Okay.
There's nothing special to them. They're not doing it, and they just have a key range. That's it.
Mm-hmm. So you have, I think there were 3 there, or do you have 2 different sets? Oh, so they're all running. It's sending 6 pitches simultaneously.
It is, but there's 3 different sets of, there's this set and there's this set.
Gotcha.
And they're just 2 different chordal sets, and then it's just down the keyboard.
Gotcha.
And for here, I actually have 4 chords set up, and it has nothing to do with pitches on a keyboard really, but it's and rather than trying to chord it out, I didn't have enough room on the keyboard. I built the chords instead.
Gotcha.
Because it just makes it easier for me to do it that way, and allow me to play with the other hand and not stumble on the chords. It's much easier.
Right. And I think that's important too, right? Like when you're building something, like you have to know what you're trying to build. Like all of this patchwork and everything is completely arbitrary until you have a desired outcome, really, right? Figuring out how to make it work is just an absolute necessity. So, hey, David actually wrote in a question. Why are you using separate instruments in Kontakt?
Separate. So depends on which one he's talking about. So from what I know in Kontakt.
Oh, David's coming on. Hold on.
Okay.
Hey, David.
Hey there. Good to see you, Joel and Brett. No, I noticed you pulled up one Kontakt and you had 6 different ensembles in it. Right. Yeah. Right. I was just wondering, why don't you just have one with the 6 different samples on different keys?
So I'm still learning this. That's why.
Oh, okay. That's asked and answered.
But it's one multi, but I don't have it as one longitudinal sample set.
Right, but does each of those just have one sample on it on one key?
Yeah.
Now, can you open one of them?
Sure.
Yeah. So you could get rid of the other 5 and just put those samples on 5 different or 6 different keys and just have one instrument.
I've learned that synth with with one of the sitars that I worked with for this rolling.
I don't know if it'll save you very much because it's very low CPU thing, but I mean, just management, it's kind of easier to have one. But okay, I was just curious. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Sure.
I actually like to point stuff like this out, Joel, because you build something and then it works, and then maybe you learned a new trick later, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go back and change it because it works, right? So, there's no reason to go back in. There was another question. Somebody just wrote in, has the global Rackspace been any advantage to you?
Yes, the global Rackspace has in 2 instances so far. And
Okay.
again, I started doing this, I'm working my way into the complexity because kind of like with every synth, there's always going to be stuff that you're never going to use.
Right.
It's the nature of what it is. Out of a synth, out of a workhorse synth, I'll probably use 40% of it.
Right.
But out of a synth that I'm not really working that hard with, I might use 10% of it. With Gig Performer, it's becoming that workhorse. It is a workhorse for me now. And I probably use 40 to 50%. There's things that I would like to see in Gig Performer. One of them is actually I would like to see when you're in the wiring side, you can create a favorite. Here, I can't. So like I would love to take this, I can copy and paste it, but I can't make it a favorite. And
Well, you can save Rackspace fronts. Like
right.
if you go in,
yes.
but okay, you didn't know that.
Yeah. But if I'm plugging something in, like all of these Rackspace fronts are different, but this gain stage is the control for my output gain stage. So having this as a favorite on the wiring side, I plug in all the time. These I copy from one Rackspace to another to get the same thing, but I still have to go back and program the MIDI stuff. It's a time saver, but it doesn't change the functionality. But it's one of those things I went, wow, that would be a cool thing to have.
Yes. Yep.
There's so many. I mean, we all come up with that as like.
Naboj is shaking his head. For those of you who can't see it,
he's what?
Naboj is shaking his head and laughing in the background. David is too. Just because the feature, there are so many feature requests that come up. By the way, because people are using them to do real stuff. Which is
when I was working in Ensoniq, it was the same thing. You would get feature requests, like just so many feature requests, and we would sit around a table and have meetings about this. And the head engineer would just go, okay, we have to make a product at some point.
Right.
And stop the feature creep. And we have to stop here and actually get something so that we can all pay and stay different.
David and Naboj are all giving us thumbs up here. You have to make a product at some point.
Right. You have to be able to eat and get paid.
Right.
We all come from the same thing.
You're mentioning that you're doing some light programming in Gig Performer. Is there an example of that you can show us?
So yeah, and well, this kind of goes back to a gentleman who's on the phone, Mr. David.
Yes.
Who I was very frustrated trying to get a clap to go across a range of keys. And so he said, and I put it out there, and then I was having a really rough night because I was in between 2 gigs and I had to get stuff to work, and I just said, oh, the heck with it. And then David called me up and he goes, you shouldn't say the heck with it. These people work really hard. Let me show you this. And so he showed me this really cool, very simple script for doing claps. And so I have this script. It's a clap map that allows me to have the same percussion instrument across the range. And there's really nothing to it. It's a 1-line script. And it basically just says, here's the range I want to work with. Here's the note I'm sending, compile. And that's it.
Wow. And
it's super useful for doing something like claps across multiple keys or a percussion instrument across multiple keys. And so it was super simple. I couldn't figure it out. Fortunately, somebody came to my aid and helped me figure it out. So I'm not doing light programming. I'm doing adaptations of other people's programming.
Which, but I think it's important to note, like if people are watching, we have scriptlets, right, that are available on the Gig and Rackspace files page of our community forum. I actually haven't seen this one on the community forum, but that doesn't mean it's not there. But there's
something else. David has it listed as something else. I call it clap map because it's mostly used for claps.
Right. Gotcha. I know there's like somebody built a sostenuto pedal, which I thought was pretty interesting. Using G. I mean, you can do such insane things with it. Now, granted, you don't have to use it in order to make Gig Performer functional, as you can see from your current setup. But having the option is nice, especially if you are somebody with a programming background. Joel, is there like one more like Rackspace you could show us that you think might be interesting?
So yeah, I came across. So one of the tough things that I came across was how to deal with sitars, and
Okay.
so because sitars are a tough beast.
Yeah,
and they act differently. They want to be different than anything else. And of course, I'm going to have to just do a quick thing here to tell it where it is.
sure.
There we go. That should do it. And let's see. Sorry, this will just take a second.
Oh, no worries.
There we go. That should be most of it. And let's see if that fixes it. Because I update, what I do is I update my live computer and then bring it over to the studio computer. And it takes a bit. The content is not exactly in the same place because of the way the computers are organized. And so this may or may not come out the way I want to. But there's a sitar plugin that I went through 3 or 4 different sitar plugins to find one that really sounded like a sitar, that was playable, that was workable. And let's see. There it is.
Is your sitar plugin open? Should we be seeing that or no?
I do have it open here.
Gotcha.
So it's a sitar multi, and frankly I forgot which company it came from right at the moment. And then it gives me this, and I set it up so that I could have my drone notes with a different attack and release and no response to pitch bend at the same time I'm doing. And so I have the ability to do all of the bends on the upper notes that you would find a player doing. At the same time, they're plugging just these and letting them ring.
Interesting.
And so I can ring it, hold the note on one, and do pitch bend with the other.
I know you. Where is the pitch bend coming from? Are you using the wheel on your keyboard or? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm still a pitch bend wheel guy.
That's great. And so to get those left-hand notes, are you using like an auto sustainer, or how are you getting those to ring out?
No, I built an envelope for them. I just built a longer envelope.
Gotcha. And you did that within Contact, the envelope you built?
I did.
Okay. Awesome. That's actually interesting. Part of like, I guess what it takes to make an authentic sound is an understanding of the actual instrument and how it's played, right? Otherwise, you never would have come to this.
It's more of just listening and really listening to what's happening on the thing you're trying to emulate. And so it's like, what are they doing? And I'm also a nerd that way, that I'll go and watch a sitar player video and go, oh, that's what he's doing. And then listen to the track that I'm trying to work towards, like in this case, Paint It Black by the Stones. And it was, all right, this is what they're doing in the background, and listen to it over and over again. And for the Blinded Me with Science, I watched 5 or 6 different live videos that Thomas Dolby did before I started working on it. And I went, oh, that's what he's doing. And listen to him talk about the interview he did with the English guy, and then went to the English guy's site, and he's a professor, and he's like an English professor, and there's a whole story behind him, and he's boring as hell. But the whole thing that Thomas Dolby put together when his studio was in the back of a butcher shop in London, and he got this guy to come in and paid this guy just to say all this goofy stuff. And he just kept the record button on and just said, no, can you say it like this? No, can you say it like that? And then he goes, well, you know, a woman would never blind me with science. It's like, oh, you know, and it's the happy accident that became a platinum song.
Oh
So,
gosh. Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of understanding what you're trying to emulate and what the outcome is, because it's easy to get lost in all of this technology. And Sting said it best a long time ago. He said the technology needs to help you write and help you perform and not be an impediment.
Yep.
And that's one thing that gig performers really help, because I could not migrate this using any other platform in this way. And it's as flexible as I need it to be, so I can jump from a Stones tribute band tomorrow night, for example, and then Saturday night I'm with another cover band, and Monday I'm with an original band. And I can just go from one to the other, forgetting about anything, and just, you know, it doesn't matter. It's completely free form, which is what I need it to be.
So Joel, well, I guess first of all, those of you who are watching, if you have any questions you want Joel to answer while we've got him here, put those in the comments right now. But Joel, people are listening to you talk. They're seeing your space. If there are people who are in Austin, how do they find out when and where you're playing? How do they hear your music?
So if they're in Austin, tomorrow night I'm playing at the Saxon Pub with a band called Tumbling Dice. It's a Rolling Stones tribute band. And I'm easy to find. I'm one of the few keyboard players in Austin.
Gotcha.
There are a lot of guitar players, but there aren't that many keyboard players, which is why I play in so many bands. And so I play with a band called Code Blue, another one called Hidden Run, another Killers tribute band, another one called Honey Punch, another one that is just starting up right now, and another one called Backbones. And I have two writing partners and some writing partners in Seattle. So I stay busy.
Yeah. So
and Woogie piano as well.
Do you play? Do you post most of your stuff on Facebook, or how can people follow you?
Excuse me. Most of the stuff is on Facebook. You can friend me. Easy to find on Facebook. You know, or you can follow me, or you can swear at me, whatever. Then I'm posting original material as it's getting released on SoundCloud.
Yes. So we'll link up all of these sites and also your SoundCloud in the description shortly, just so people can access them. But Joel's SoundCloud is very interesting. Definitely go check it out. He's got a wide range of things happening there, so you can kind of just see, you know, forget even just for a moment the breadth of what's possible in gig performer, but just, you know, inside the mind of a musician who's playing with a lot of different bands and a lot of different styles for a really long time. It's very, very cool. Joel, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of us with this. This has been awesome.
Thank you guys for listening to me babble for an hour.
No, it's been great. Actually, Glenn said, thank you, Joe and Cruel. Best show so far. So there you go. You get the medal. But anyway, Joel, thanks so much for being with us, and maybe we'll have you back soon.
Sure.
All right.
Great. You guys take care.